The glass shattered before anyone moved. Not the wine glass that stayed in Tessa Holmes' hands, trembling. It was the dessert plate that Councilman Gerald Hargrove's wife had swept off the table with one perfectly manicured arm, sending it spinning across the marble floor of the Meridian ballroom, where it exploded like a small bomb at Tessa's feet. The string quartet stopped playing. Every head in the room turned. Councilman Hargrove's wife, Pamela, in a champagne-colored gown that cost more than Tessa's car, stood up from her chair with the slow theatrical grace of a woman who had practiced being furious. She was 50, beautiful the way expensive things are beautiful, and her eyes were the color of something that had been polished until all the warmth was gone. "You did that on purpose," Pamela said. Her voice was so calm it was worse than screaming. Tessa looked at the floor. The fragments of china were scattered across the marble like broken teeth. Her grip tightened on the wine glass she was still holding, the one she had been refilling when Pamela's elbow knocked hers. Not the other way around. She had felt it happen. The slight, sharp impact of a woman who had wanted an excuse. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Hargrove. I'll have it cleaned up immediately. You spilled red wine on my husband's sleeve," Pamela said. Tessa looked at Councilman Gerald Hargrove. The sleeve of his tuxedo jacket had a pale pink stain the size of a quarter rosé, actually. From earlier, when someone at another table had bumped the service tray. Tessa had seen it happen. She was not the one holding that tray. "Mrs. Hargrove, Don't." Pamela stepped closer. The sound of her heels on marble was like a clock ticking down. "Do you know what this event costs? Do you know who is in this room tonight?" Tessa knew. The Metropolitan Cancer Research Gala, 240 guests, minimum donation $5,000 a plate. The room was full of senators, surgeons, and people whose names were on hospital wings. She had been working this circuit for 3 years. The white uniform, the silver trays, the careful invisibility of it. She knew exactly who was in this room. She also knew that none of them were going to help her. Tessa said, keeping her voice even. "We'll comp the cleaning for the jacket, and Pamela's hand moved faster than Tessa was ready for. The slap was open-palmed and deliberate. It caught her just below the ear, the force of it snapping her head sideways. The wineglass slipped. Red pooled across the white marble. The sound of impact echoed once through the ballroom, and then was swallowed by a silence so complete, Tessa could hear her own pulse. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. Tessa pressed her hand to the side of her face. Her ear was ringing. Her eyes burned, not from sadness. She didn't have the luxury of sadness right now, but from the shock of it, from the sheer animal surprise of being struck in front of 240 people who were doing absolutely nothing. "Clean it up," Pamela said. "All of it, and then get out of my sight." She turned back to her chair. That was when the voice came from the far end of the table. "Pamela." One word, not loud, not sharp. It was the kind of voice that didn't need volume because it had gravity instead. Victor Caruso had not moved from his seat. He was still leaning back in his chair the way he had been for the last hour, one hand resting on the stem of his glass, watching the room with the particular boredom of a man who found most things beneath him. He was 40, perhaps, though the lines of his face suggested he had lived the kind of life that ages a person past their years and then stops. Dark hair, dark suit, a charity gala pin on his lapel that he wore the way kings wear crowns. Because he was required to, not because he needed it. Everyone at the table knew who he was. Rafael Caruso's older brother, chairman of Caruso Capital Group, the man who had quietly funded 40% of the research wing this gala. He set down his glass. "I'd like you to sit down," he said to Pamela, still quiet, still calm. Pamela blinked. "Excuse me?" "Sit down." The repetition of it was worse than the first time. It had the patience of a man who was not going to say it 3 times. Pamela sat. The color had gone out of her face. Victor Caruso stood up. He buttoned the top button of his jacket, one slow, deliberate motion, and walked around the table. The guests on either side pulled their chairs back slightly, almost unconsciously, the way water moves around something solid. He stopped in front of Tessa. She was still holding her hand against her cheek. She looked up at him. He was taller than she expected, and closer than she was comfortable with, and his eyes were the dark gray of something that had been through weather. "Let me see," said. "It wasn't a question. It's fine," Tessa said. "I'm fine. I just need to get someone to clean." "Your cheek is cut." He said it matter-of-factly, the way a doctor reports a finding. He was right. Pamela had been wearing a cocktail ring, wide set with a square stone, and it had caught the skin just in front of Tessa's ear. She could feel the sting of it now that the shock was wearing off. He turned his head to look at the event coordinator, a panicked man named Douglas, who was hovering 12 feet away with a walkie-talkie in each hand. "Bring a first aid kit," Victor said. "And a chair, sir." Douglas started. "Now." Douglas disappeared at a trot. Victor looked back at Tessa. "What's your name?" "Tessa," she said. "Tessa Holm." He repeated it the way people repeat something they intend to remember. Then, he looked over his shoulder at the councilman, who had been sitting very still and very quiet since Victor stood up. "Gerald," Victor said pleasantly, "I'm going to need you to tell me something. Did you see what just happened?" Councilman Hargrove cleared his throat. "It was an accident, I'm sure. Your wife struck a member of the service staff in front of 240 people. With her ring hand." Victor tilted his head slightly. "That isn't an accident, Gerald. That's battery." The word dropped into the room like something heavy. "I think," Victor continued, his voice never rising above a conversational tone, "that you and Pamela should finish the rest of your evening somewhere else. I'll have Douglas arrange a car. Victor, I fund this event," Victor said simply. "I've funded it for 9 years. I believe that gives me standing to ask you to leave." Councilman Hargrove looked at his wife. His wife looked at the table. Neither of them looked at Tessa. They left. Douglas came back with a chair and a first aid kit. Victor gestured for Tessa to sit. She did, because her legs had started to shake and sitting down felt like the only honest thing she could do. Victor crouched in front of her. He opened the kit himself, which surprised her, and found a square of gauze and an antiseptic swab with the ease of someone who had used a first aid kit before in less formal circumstances. "This is going to sting," he said. "I know," she said. "I have a lot of practice." He paused for just a moment at that, but he didn't ask. He cleaned the cut with the gauze and she didn't make a sound. He pressed the corner of it gently with 2 fingers to check if it would close on its own. "It'll bruise," he said, "but it doesn't need stitches." "Good," she said. "I can't afford the copay." She said it before she could stop herself. It was the kind of thing you say when you're exhausted and your head is ringing, and you're trying very hard not to cry in front of 240 strangers. Victor looked at her. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "Tessa," he said quietly, "when is the last time you slept a full night?" She didn't answer, because the honest answer was that she didn't remember. He stood up. He looked at Douglas, who was still hovering, now with only one walkie-talkie and a deeply uncertain expression. "Find whoever is running tonight's staffing," Victor said. "I want Miss Holm removed from the schedule for the rest of the evening. Full pay. And tell them if she isn't employed at the next 3 events of this circuit, they'll be looking for a new primary donor." He paused. "For all 4. Douglas nodded rapidly and walked away. Tessa stood up. "You don't have to do that. I know. I'm serious. I need this job. I've been on this circuit for 3 years. If you make it complicated for me, it doesn't matter that you meant well. I still end up, Tessa." He said her name the way he had said Pamela's, quiet, with weight behind it. "I'm not making it complicated. I'm making sure you don't get penalized for something that wasn't your fault. That's all." The sincerity of it was more unsettling than the slap had been, in its own way. She was used to the slap. She was not used to this. "Thank you," she said finally. He handed her a folded handkerchief, white, monogrammed, clearly not a first aid kit item, and nodded once. He turned to go back to his table. "Mr. Caruso," he stopped. "Why?" she asked. He turned back. His expression was measured, careful, the way a man looks when he's deciding how honest to be. "Because I've been watching you work this room all night," he said. "And you checked your phone 11 times. Not once to look at social media, always the same app, the same screen." He looked at her steadily. "Whatever you're waiting to hear, you're terrified of it. And a woman who's that frightened of her phone, still doing her job without missing a step, doesn't deserve to be the reason someone else has a bad night." Tessa's chest tightened. She didn't say anything. She couldn't. He left. She stood there in the middle of the emptying Meridian ballroom and pressed his handkerchief very carefully against the cut on her cheek and breathed. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She pulled it out. "Dr. Renner, 9:47 p.m. Tessa, please call me when you can. We need to discuss Jonah's scans from this morning. It's important we connect before the weekend." She had been waiting for that message since 7 a.m. She had known, in the particular way you know things you don't want to know, that it was coming. Jonah was her younger brother. He was 19. 8 months ago, he had collapsed during soccer practice, and what followed was a cascade of appointments and terminology and bills that had quietly dismantled the entire shape of Tessa's life. She had moved back from Boston. She had taken every shift she could get. She had sold the things worth selling and deferred the things that could be deferred, and told Jonah that everything was fine with the specific calm of someone performing surgery on themselves without anesthetic. The medical debt was $67,000 and climbing. The apartment was 2 months behind, and Dr. Renner's message said scans, not results, which meant they had found something on the imaging that required a conversation. She stepped outside through the service exit. The Chicago night hit her like a glass of cold water. She called. The number, Dr. Renner answered on the second ring. She didn't remember the drive home. She remembered standing on the sidewalk outside her building with her hand pressed flat against the brick wall for several minutes before she could make herself go inside. Jonah was awake when she got in. He was on the couch with his laptop, the bluish light of it turning his face pale, and he was thinner than last month, and he looked up when she came in with an expression that was trying very hard to look relaxed. "Hey," he said. "How was it? Busy," she said. She sat down next to him. He was wearing the grey sweater she had washed so many times it had gone thin at the elbows. "How are you feeling?" "Fine," he said. The way he said it told her he was not fine, and he knew she knew, and neither of them were going to say so. "Did you eat tonight?" "I ate at the event," she lied. He nodded. He turned back to his laptop. She sat there for a moment with her hand on his shoulder, feeling the realness of him, the warm, ordinary weight of a person she loved, and she thought about what Dr. Renner had told her. The tumor had changed. The current medication wasn't holding. They were recommending an escalation of treatment, a procedure and a new protocol that would take 12 weeks and require a specialist. Dr. Renner had given her a number, $91,000 after what insurance would cover. She went to the kitchen and stood at the sink for a long time with the faucet running. Then she opened her tote bag and found Victor Caruso's handkerchief at the bottom, still slightly damp at the corner. She held it in both hands. She thought about his eyes, the way he had said her name, the way he had looked at her phone like he already understood the shape of her life without being told. She thought about what it meant that a man like that had noticed her at all. Then she put the handkerchief down and told herself to stop thinking like someone who couldn't afford to. She found out where to reach him through the Gala's donor coordinator, who owed her a small favor and was too flustered to ask questions. She sent a formal email to the Caruso Capital Group administrative address, thanking Victor for his intervention and returning the professional courtesy by promising not to make the incident with the Hargroves into anything public. She kept it brief. She kept it clean. She pressed send before she could talk herself out of it. He responded in 4 minutes. The email was 3 sentences. He had read her email. He would be in his office on Thursday. If she had time, he'd appreciate a brief conversation. She didn't have time. She took the morning off work and went anyway. The Caruso Capitol building was 43 floors of glass and matte steel on the river, the kind of building that doesn't try to announce itself because it doesn't have to. The lobby was cool and white and very quiet. The receptionist sent her up with the particular deference of someone who had been told to expect her. The elevator opened directly into a corner office that was, if anything, more unsettling than the Gala. Not because it was large or expensive, though it was both, but because of how ordered it was. Every surface was clear. Every document was in a folder. There was nothing extraneous, nothing decorative, nothing that didn't serve a purpose. It was the office of a man who had decided exactly what he needed and gotten rid of everything else. Victor Caruso was standing at the window with his back to her, looking at the river. "Close the door," he said without turning around. She closed it. He turned then, and he looked at her face first, at the faint bruise along her cheekbone, nearly covered by makeup, and she watched him catalogue it the way he had catalogued the room at the Gala. "Sit down, Tessa," he said. She sat in one of the chairs across from his desk. He came around and sat on the edge of it rather than behind it, which she understood was intentional, not trying to put the desk between them. "I looked into you," he said. The directness of it made her blink. "I know," she said, because she had been expecting it, the way you expect things from men like him. "Your brother's name is Jonah Holm, 19, diagnosed with a medullary brain tumor 8 months ago. You've been his legal guardian since your parents' accident 4 years ago. You have $67,000 in current medical debt, and you're approximately 7 weeks from losing your apartment." He paused. "The new treatment protocol Dr. Renner is recommending will cost somewhere around $90,000 out of pocket." Tessa didn't look away. If she looked away, she would cry, and she was not going to cry in this office. "What do you want?" she asked. Victor looked at her for a long moment. He had the expression of someone who respected a question that didn't waste time. "I need something," he said. "And I need it soon, and it needs to be someone I can trust, which creates a significant problem because I can't trust the people I know." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm in a situation," he said. "My company is being investigated. Not because I've done anything wrong, but because someone inside my organization has been feeding information to a federal contractor who is trying to dismantle a deal I've spent 4 years building. The leak is internal, and in 2 weeks I have a board dinner in Aspen that every major investor will attend, and I need to walk in that room with someone on my arm who is not connected to my world, someone who doesn't have a history with any of these people, someone who cannot be pressured by them because she has no allegiances, and frankly," he paused, "because she has enough of her own problems that mine become a useful distraction." Tessa said nothing. I want you to attend the Aspen dinner as my girlfriend, Victor said. Then a shareholders' lunch in New York. Then the Caruso Foundation event in March. 3 appearances, 10 weeks apart. Long enough that it reads as a real relationship. Long enough that it changes the narrative around me before the investigation reaches the press. What narrative? That I'm unreachable. Cold. That I built this company by stepping on people. A slight pause. Some of that is accurate. The strategic version of it is useful. But right now I need the room to see me differently, and a woman who looks at me the way you looked at me at the gala is more convincing than anything I could manufacture. Tessa thought about the way she had looked at him. Like she was trying to figure out what he wanted so she could survive it. That's fear, she said. I was afraid of you. I know, he said. That's also real. And the room will read it as awe, which is close enough. He reached to his desk and picked up a folder. He held it out to her. In exchange, I'll pay off your current medical debt, fund the new treatment in full, and cover your rent for the duration of the arrangement. Tessa didn't take the folder. Why not hire someone? She asked. An actress. A publicist. Someone who does this professionally. Because professionally arranged companions have paperwork and agencies and agents. Agencies talk. Publicists have their own relationships in this industry. And actresses, he looked at her steadily, are very good at performing things they don't feel. What I need is someone who doesn't know how to hide what's on her face. You looked at Pamela Hargrove getting into that car, and I watched every single thing you were thinking. Which was that you were humiliated, that you were relieved she was leaving, that you were angry it had taken someone else to make her leave. A pause, and that you weren't going to thank me for it, even though you did, because the thank you felt like a surrender, and you don't surrender easily. Tessa was quiet for a moment. This isn't a romantic arrangement, she said. No, I'm not. This isn't that. I understand, Victor said. There was no performance in it. 3 public appearances. Professional conduct. I don't need anything from you that you haven't already demonstrated you're capable of. And Jonah? His next appointment is Monday at 11. I'll have Dr. Renner transferred to the Caruso Medical Foundation's network. They have a neuro-oncology team that is significantly better resourced. His treatment starts as soon as it's medically appropriate. He held the folder out again. Read the terms. You have a lawyer, or I can provide one independently. She didn't have a lawyer. She took the folder. She read it in the lobby on the way out, standing by the window with the river behind her. It was 12 pages of careful, clean language. The financial provisions were specific. The public appearance requirements were specific. There was a non-disclosure clause, mutual, which she thought was interesting. There was a line near the end. Party A acknowledges that Party B's participation is voluntary and contingent upon Party B's ongoing consent, which may be withdrawn in writing at any time, resulting in renegotiation of terms. She read that line twice. She called her brother from the sidewalk outside. Hey, Jonah said. Hey, she said. How's your morning? Boring. Dr. Renner's office called and wants to reschedule Monday. He paused. Tessa, how bad is it? The money thing. I know you keep. It's handled, she said. A silence. What did you do? Jonah said. I got a second job, she said. A different kind. I'll explain it tonight. I need you to trust me. I always trust you, he said. She closed her eyes for a moment, standing there on the sidewalk in the November cold. I'll be home for dinner, she said. I love you. She hung up and stood there for a few more seconds, looking at nothing. Then she went back inside, took the elevator to the 43rd floor, and walked back into the office where Victor Caruso was standing at the window again, watching the river, waiting. I have questions, she said. I expected you would. If I asked to renegotiate something in the contract, do you actually mean what you wrote about consent being ongoing, or is that language? He turned from the window and looked at her. It means what it says. Okay, she held the folder. The Aspen dinner. What am I supposed to know about you? If your investors ask me questions, what do I say? Whatever you observe, he said. That's the point. I haven't observed much. Then you'll learn, he said. You have 2 weeks. It was quiet. Outside, the river moved. I have one rule, Tessa said. He waited. Jonah doesn't know what this is. He knows I took a job as an executive liaison, or some title that sounds real. I will not have him carrying this on top of everything else. She held his gaze. Whatever this arrangement is, it stays between us. He believes I made a normal professional choice. That's non-negotiable. Victor looked at her for a long moment. The grey of his eyes in daylight was different from the gala, less cold somehow, more like something still and deep. Agreed, he said. The Aspen dinner was in a private lodge outside of town, the kind of place accessible by one road that wound up through the pine trees like a secret. Tessa had been given 3 days of preparation, a stylist, a briefing document about the 8 investors who would be present, and 40 minutes on Tuesday afternoon with Victor himself, sitting across from each other in a conference room while he answered questions. She had learned things. He had grown up in Pittsburgh, the second of 2 sons. He had taken over the company at 32 when his father's health declined, inheriting a portfolio that was solid but unambitious, and spent 8 years making it into what it currently was. He had never been publicly linked to anyone seriously. He gave to 4 charities, 2 in healthcare, 1 in education, 1 in criminal justice reform, and he did not publicize any of them. She had told him things too. He asked, which she hadn't expected, about Boston, where she had been finishing a graduate degree in environmental policy before Jonah got sick. About her parents, who had been killed by a driver running a red light when she was 24, and Jonah was 15. About the peculiar education of becoming someone's guardian when you're barely finished becoming yourself. She had not meant to tell him that last part. It came out in the honest, unguarded way that things come out at the end of a long day. He had listened without adjusting his expression to make her feel better, which was the only way she could have stood it. At the Aspen Lodge, she wore a dark green dress. He met her in the entrance hall wearing a charcoal jacket and no tie, which was the most casual she had seen him, and he looked at her and said, "Good," without any inflection, which she had learned by now was about the warmest thing he said. He offered his arm as they entered. She took it. His hand covered hers briefly before he settled it at his side. The dinner was 3 hours. She sat next to him. She answered questions about how they had met. She stayed close to True, the gala, which no one had attended, and she watched the room the way he had told her he'd watched her at the gala, noticing things. She noticed which investors leaned in when Victor spoke, and which ones kept their eyes on their wine. She noticed the man on the far end of the table, a man named Denton Briggs who smiled too often and too quickly, and whose eyes were doing a different calculation than his mouth. On the drive back to the hotel, she said, "Denton Briggs." Victor, who had been looking at his phone, looked up. "He's the one," she said. "He's your leak." Silence. "What makes you say that?" Victor's voice was careful. He laughed in the wrong place. When you talked about the acquisition timeline, everyone else's face went neutral, the way people's faces go when they're trying to look like they don't have a reaction. His went, pleased. "But he was watching you to see if you'd notice. He's feeding information and he knows you're looking for the source, and he thinks he's been careful enough." Victor was very still. "I've been watching that man for 3 months," he said. "I've been reading rooms for 10 years, she said. "It's most of what the job is." He looked at her for a long time. The car moved through the dark mountain road, pine trees pressing in on either side. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "Someone I'd have to manage," he said simply. She looked out the window. The snow on the ground caught the moonlight and turned it blue. "I'm not unmanageable," she said. "I just don't cooperate with things that aren't worth cooperating with." "No," he agreed quietly. "I'm beginning to see that." 3 days later, she was back in Chicago. Jonah had started the first phase of his new treatment. The neuro-oncology team at the Caruso Foundation's affiliated hospital was, as Victor had said, significantly better resourced, and the difference was visible in the way the nursing staff moved, and the quietness of the rooms, and the fact that someone called her by name when she arrived. She sat with Jonah for 2 hours while he slept. He was thinner than he had been, but his color was better, and the nurse said the first week of the new protocol was showing what they'd hoped to see. She pressed her hand flat on the blanket over his shoulder and did not let herself feel the relief yet. Relief was something you felt when it was over. Her phone buzzed. "Victor. Briggs resigned this morning. Thank you." She stared at the message for a moment. "Don't thank. I just paid attention," she wrote back. "That's worth more than you think." He replied. She put the phone away. She was still sitting there an hour later when Jonah woke up, and he looked at her with the particular exhausted clarity of someone who has been sick long enough to stop wasting energy on pretending. "Tessa," he said. "I'm here. This place is really different from the other one." He looked at the ceiling. "Like genuinely different. They knew my name when I came in." He paused. "What kind of executive liaison job pays for something like this?" She smoothed the edge of his blanket. "The kind where you work for someone who pays attention to details," she said. He looked at her sideways. "Are you okay?" She thought about Victor's hand covering hers at the entrance to the Aspen Lodge, about the drive through the mountain dark, about the way he had looked at her in the conference room when she told him about becoming Jonah's guardian, and he had not tried to give her anything to make it easier. "I'm doing what needs to be done," she said. "That's not the same as okay," Jonah said. "I know," she said. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was weaker than it used to be, but it was there. She sat with him until he fell back asleep, and when she got home she found a formal email from Victor's assistant in her inbox. The arrangements for the New York shareholders' lunch in 6 weeks, the dress code, the briefing packet that would follow. At the bottom of the email, below the assistant's signature, was a single line in a different font, added manually. The rooms at the Foundation Hospital don't have a good chair for overnight stays. I'll have them bring one up. She read it twice. She hadn't mentioned staying overnight. She hadn't mentioned the chair. She set her phone down on the kitchen table and looked at the ceiling, and understood that Victor Caruso paid attention to details too. He just did it very quietly, the way he did most things, and she had not been paying close enough attention to notice until now. Outside, the Chicago wind moved through the street. She could hear it through the window she kept cracked because Jonah liked the air. She thought about the Aspen Lodge. She thought about Denton Briggs and his too quick smile, and what it meant that she had seen what Victor's own team hadn't, and about the way Victor had said, "You're not what I expected," with something that sounded, very quietly, like relief. She did not let herself think past that. She picked up the phone and replied to the assistant's email confirming the New York dates. Then she turned the lights off and stood at the window for a long moment, watching the street below, her reflection faint in the glass. A woman who had walked into a ballroom as a ghost and was now somehow standing in the outline of a life she didn't entirely recognize. She had sold a year, she had done it for Jonah, and she would do it again. But standing there in the dark, she was starting to understand that the hardest part wasn't going to be the public appearances, or the contract language, or the dinner in Aspen. The hardest part was going to be remembering why she had done this, when the man she had done it with kept making it very quietly difficult to stay afraid of him. And somewhere in that lodge in the mountains, she suspected Victor Caruso was already aware of that. The question she couldn't answer yet was whether that made him more dangerous, or something else entirely.